cover the council's video policy quickly.
You're not live, Chair.
Thank you, Joelle. Welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee of 2024. I'm your chair, Lewis Stark, and we will be discussing today the Nutrient Management Board. Some introductions for those of you who are online in terms of the video policy. The council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. We have a number of people in the room today and a number of people online. I will introduce the people in the room today, and then I'll go to the people online and I'll check they can hear and see me when I do. In the room today we have committee members, Richard Thomas, Councillor Thomas I should say, Councillor Highfield, Councillor Davis. We also have Councillor Swinglehurst, who is the Deputy Leader of the Council and who is not a committee member but will be helping us in our scrutiny today. Councillor Swinglehurst is the Lead on Environment. We have Liz Duberley, who is the Service Manager for, as I understand it, when I read it, Built and Natural Environment. Is that still the case, Liz? Well, welcome as well. And we have Simon Evans, the CEO of the Y and Us Foundation. Thanks for returning, Simon. I'm glad the first time you were here didn't put you off. Online we have a number of officers and also one expert witness as well. I'll go to the expert witness first, which is Dr. Christine Hugh-Jones, Campaign for the Protection of Rural Wales. Christine, can you see and hear me? And welcome to the meeting.
I can see you, and I can hear you, but I can't see a microphone or video thing on my... Oh, here we are. Yeah, I can see you and hear you.
Yes, and we can see and hear you as well, Christine. Thank you very much. And then we have two officers, Mark Averill, who is the Service Director, Environment and Highways. Mark, can you see and hear me?
I certainly can, Councillor Stark. Good morning. Apologies I can't be there this morning.
Yeah, but welcome to the meeting. And then we have Rachel Joy. Rachel, you'll have to explain what your title is at the moment.
Good morning, Councillor Stark. Good morning, committee. My name is Rachel Joy. I am the Interim Delivery Director for Environmental Transformation, a grand title for something that covers this area. Can I just say at the outset, Councillor Stark, we've been without power and internet most of the night here, and lights are still flashing. So if I go, it's not out of rudeness to the committee.
Yes.
I'll try and return as soon as I can.
But thank you, Rachel, for attending today. I do appreciate it. Right, we'll go on to the agenda item. Oh no, I missed the point. We have a very important team supporting us today. I should not forget them. We have Daniel Webb, our Scrutiny Officer, Simon Kahn, who is the clerk for this committee, and Joelle Higgins, who's doing the live stream from Democratic Services. Thank you. Right, clerk, apologies for absence.
Received apologies from Ross Cook. No other apologies.
And from Councillor Pebbody?
Councillor Pebbody may be joining us potentially live if she's able to do so.
Apologies for being in the room. Okay, right. Name substitutes, we don't have any. Declarations of interest, committee members? None? Fine, thanks. Minutes, are the members in the room happy with the minutes that have been circulated and for me to sign them? Right, that's fine. Do I need to sign them now, Simon, or could do that after? Okay, right. Have we any questions from members of the public?
No questions received from members of the public.
Questions from members of the council?
No questions received from members of the council.
Fine, thanks. We now move on to item 7, which is the most substantive item on the agenda, which is the Nutrient Management Board. Can I thank officers for the background paper and the 5 appendices that they gave us? I was very grateful for that. So I found it very useful and quite an eye-opener, actually. And I hope committee members found it quite an opener today. Basically, what our task in front of us today is to look at the actual history and background of the NMB to understand the context, to actually look at it from a council perspective, not from all partners' perspective. We do have Simon and we do have Christine, hopefully, who can feed in as they can to the context. But we are really looking at this from a council perspective and what has the board delivered from our business priorities, particularly in terms of the river and the nutrient recovery of the river. I have put together 16 questions for the meeting today to actually give it some structure. I'm sorry, everyone online, I don't think you will have the questions unless Clark, it's a chance to share them on the screen if you can. These 16 questions I've drafted from the papers that we've received to try and, as I say, focus us on what we think are the main issues I think the committee has to cover today. One of the committee members, Councillor Thomas, has agreed to lead on questions 4 to 6, so you don't hear my voice all day. But for the rest of the time, I will be leading on the other questions. Have you been able to share them on the if you can? Right. I think that's very useful for those online. Right, I will start the ball rolling. Councillor Swinglehurst, this is the one thing I'm really trying to get to grips with. What was the original purpose for setting up the NMB with key partners? I'd like to know your opinion on that, and then I'll go to Simon and Christine as well, if they can add to it.
Thank you, Chairman. I would direct your attention to the Atkins paper that was produced on behalf of the Environment Agency, Natural Resource Wales and Natural England, May 2014, which kind of sets out the parameters. So what it says there is, as part of the Environment Agency's review of consents process in 2010, it was agreed that a plan is needed for the River Wye SAC in order to reduce current phosphate concentrations in the river to comply with conservation objectives. To this end, in 2013, the Environment Agency and Natural England issued a joint statement of intent to prepare a nutrient management plan for the River Wye SAC, which would also address predicted growth within the catchment. In this way, the Environment Agency and Natural England are also working together to support Herefordshire Council to develop a framework for determining planning applications which are constrained by their habitats assessment process. The proposals will also inform Herefordshire Council's core strategy and other relevant development plans. The core strategy was adopted in 2015, so you can see that these things are happening within the same time frame. So you've got that kind of bifurcation of intent from the get-go, which is the enabling of Herefordshire Council's core strategy, but also putting into place a plan for the recovery of the catchment to favourable conservation status. But the inception of it sits with the statutory agencies, not with the Herefordshire Council. Does that help?
Yeah, just to add, my understanding of it was that it was a condition that was put on by the planning inspector for the approval of the 2014 core plan. And as such, the council took control of it because it was a condition that was put on by the planning inspector. So that there was an initial moratorium on housing in 2013, and then this was eased by the core plan and the creation of a nutrient management board that was going to bring the SAC into favourable condition by 2027.
I think it's very important to get the context, members, in order to understand where we might go with the nutrient management board in the future, because the one thing that concerns me is this board has been running for almost 10 years, as long as a Royal Commission, or even longer than a Royal Commission, and we know that Royal Commissions have got a checkered history. And I'm concerned that with that sort of mission in mind, why we haven't really seen as much action as we should. But I want to leave that to later in the debate. But I just leave that one with you. That's one I'll be testing today, is what's happened in that intervening time. Can we move on to the second question, which is the TORs? The TORs are Appendix 2 of Item 7 in the agenda pack for those that need to look at them. Can I go back to you again, Councillor Swinglehurst? Did we have an input into these TORs? Do we know whether the council had an input into these TORs, or were they just given to us by the two agencies? I don't mean to ask questions.
So my understanding at the beginning of the TORs were drafted at the inception of the board. I don't know who was responsible for drafting the TORs at the time. I'm afraid I can't remember. I can't
Okay.
remember that.
Can we assume they were owned by everybody on the board?
Yeah, I think logically the board would have had to have adopted them.
They would have had to adopt
yeah.
them, right? The other point that concerns me, did every member of the board have the same understanding of what was expected of the board through these TORs?
I think to answer that question, I'd have to look into the minds of men. I don't know what everyone else's understanding of the TORs would have been. I mean, I think the TORs are fairly straightforward. It's not a long, complex document. But in order to have the same understanding of it, you'd have to know where people are coming from. And I think the thing with the board is that you've actually got different, people coming from very different places on the board. Statutory agencies, conservation groups like WAF, farming lobby groups. You've got a combination of things. So whether or not they all interpret it all in the same ways, probably unlikely. But I wouldn't know.
Because one of the problems I've got with the board is the fact that it's got so many partners on it, with so many different sort of views of where they want to go, and I'm trying to get a feel for how coherent the board was in the early days when it started. Because if you don't have a common mission and a common understanding of what that mission is, then that can be a reason for why the board and what it delivers can actually drift, because people are not actually coming up with a focus for the board to take forward what's required in terms of river recovery. Is that a bit unfair, Councillor Swinglehurst, or not?
No, I think that's quite an interesting question. The things that we'd have to kind of think back to what we knew or what we thought we knew in 2014, which is different to what we know now. And indeed, what we know now is that we need to know some more stuff. But and Simon can correct me here because he was there and I wasn't. But I think at the time, 2014, the source apportionment was roughly 50-50 between sewage treatment works and agricultural diffuse. You had a plan from the sewage undertaking from Welsh Water, PR19, which would show with certainty how they were going to reduce their share, incorporating the housing growth that was within the core strategy. And therefore there was a kind of a map to this is how we're going to get to favourable conservation status by 2027. So I think there would have been, that's a fairly easy narrative for everyone to get on board with. And then on top of that, there will be voluntary actions within the agricultural sector, which was predicted to produce, a percentage reduction over time as well. So you would get where you're trying to go, and here's the plan to prove that we can do it. So I think there was a kind of probably a degree of agreement and comfort around that. However, over time, what we see is that our understanding of where the problem was coming from changed. So I would say actually probably the early stage of the board you had a greater degree of coalescence of interest.
I'll bring Simon and then I'll go to you, Christine, after Simon, and then Rachel.
I would agree with that. The board's purpose initially was to enable the core strategy, full stop. And then NE's objective is to bring the SAC into favourable condition by 2027, and the Nutrient Management Board was one of the mechanisms for doing that. At the time, the water company in particular stood up to the plate and used the requirements in the previous AMP to do some fairly significant investment, particularly on the Y. They didn't do it on the USC, they did it on the Y. And at the time, you had noises off that with UK government policy, particularly around agriculture, there was a data gap around the impact of agriculture, and what then happened was the Dutch judgment, and the Dutch judgment suddenly increased the relevance of the Nutrient Management Board. Instead of delivering by 2027, we were delivering by now, basically instantly. And that then created the tension within the Nutrient Management Board that whether it was able to deal with the pressures that were outside its control. And that's the reason why we've now got a lot of partners with conflicted interests within the board. That's my reading of the situation as it developed.
That's interesting, Simon. I'll come back to it in terms of TORs, but I want to bring Christine in now. Christine, you wanted to make a point, and then I'll bring Rachel in as well.
Well, I wasn't there aware of what was happening in the beginning, but from the supplement that we've all been reading, the aims were the favourable conservation status of the SAC and Herefordshire growth. And I think we knew at the time what a catchment was, and I've kind of found a problem ever since with the imbalance between the Herefordshire control over the Nutrient Management Board and the Welsh participation. And I think this was something that was probably there from the beginning, and Wales was brought in later, and as we went along has only quite recently been able to play its full part. And obviously favourable conservation status of the SAC applies in Powys and Monmouthshire and in Herefordshire, and to a certain extent you know, in the Forest of Dean. I think this has been a running problem, and I think another running problem, which we'll probably come back to later, is whether we should be thinking just about phosphate or whether we should be thinking about nutrients. And in all the documents, there seems to be some kind of, you know, play between this. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine, for that input. Rachel?
Chair, yes. I think probably for me the starting point for this discussion is that when we mention the term board, in the public mind, that is a collectivity, probably sitting over a corporate body with the power to direct activity. And actually, what we have with the Nutrient Management Board is probably more of a steering group. It's a voluntary body, a voluntary partnership with no powers to direct, and it comprises central and local agencies. So the Environment Agency is a national body with an independent remit, explicitly independent, reporting to Parliament through ministers. Natural Resources Wales is similarly set up with an annual remit letter from Welsh Government. So their natural focus, along with Natural England, is to the governments that host them. We then have the local authorities with different remits and different responsibilities. Our focus here in Herefordshire, given the importance of river recovery, as one important thing, but also the issue of the core strategy, delivering housing need, is of significant interest to us. So what we have actually, and that's even before we get into the environmental groups on and around the board, and the farming interest and land interest around the board, we've got quite a disparate collectivity there. And I think probably that's why in the terms of reference review that you may come to later, and the new terms of reference that the board now has, there is a recognition that the board actually is probably more of a steering group. It has no power to direct an individual agency. It can't mandate an agency to put in additional resource, but it can highlight issues, draw together, bring together a focus, and I think it has an important role to play in doing that. But I would encourage the committee probably to step back and not to think of it as a board as we normally know a board, because it isn't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Highfield?
That one. Yeah, a question that occurs to me, which is sort of more about the background. When these problems were identified and Natural England started their edicts through the Environment Agency about what needed to be done, did they ever make specific note of the fact that this involved 2 counties in Wales, 2 counties in England, and that the coordination between those bodies that had part of the Y was essential? Did they make any note of that, or did they advise or create any system whereby those different areas would be coordinated in their action? Thanks.
I think, yeah, so if I may, Chair, I'm going to also pick up on the point that was made by Christian Hugh-Jones, because it's not unrelated, I think, to the apparent kind of lopsidedness of the board being England-centric, which actually is ironic when the Y is failing in Wales and not in England. So the English Y is not failing its phosphate targets. It's the Welsh Y are both ends, and the lug, obviously, in England. And what's been interesting for me in preparation for today is going back over the old papers and coming across things like in early 2020. This is not, a bazillion years ago. Natural Resources Wales was saying, quote, "The failure on the English side of the border is not being seen in Wales," and it was when they revised the targets that changed. Now, that in a sense goes some way to explain the lopsidedness of the board, if until 2020 that was their view, that there wasn't a problem in Wales. And it was later in 2020 with the Tristan Hatton-Ellis report, which refers to widespread failures, some of them large in magnitude, and that's so in 2020 was when there was a change of gear. But up to that point, so we're going then tracking back to 2014, the Welsh element would have been thinking, well, it's not really our problem. It's a problem that you lot have got over in Herefordshire on the lug. So the level of engagement was not the same, because they didn't have the problem that they had with trying to get a core strategy through. They didn't have, the same reason to get engaged. So hence it kind of, from its inception, even though there would have been an acknowledgement from, that this is a river that crosses borders, in terms of the local authority engagement with the issue, I think that there would have been a very real difference because of what was the perceived difference in the quality of the river and the magnitude of the problem.
Thank you, Councillor Swingle. Simon? Yeah.
I would add that I would absolutely echo everything that Councillor Swingle has just said. I would, as a sort of a note of this, I remember a very heated discussion between the relatively junior NRW staff who was present on the board at the time and the Environment Agency, that the Y as it left Wales was at 0.034 milligrams per litre, and so it was passing. And the argument was, you've taken up all the headroom in Wales, so you've left us with no headroom in England. And this isn't the way that we manage a catchment. And that was sort of the problem that we had at the time. It was only when they had to generate a failure in Wales, because the river was obviously failing, and they lowered the targets, that then you got more senior members of NRW engaging with the process.
Thank you, Simon. Before we move on, because I'm trying to tease out a recommendation here, Councillor Swingerhurst, Rachel Joy mentioned there's new TORs now. Have we fed into those TORs as a council? Are you happy to reflect what we need? I'm going to talk about our business priorities later on, but what we need from the board in terms of what the board can deliver, allowing for the fact that Rachel Joy said it's not a steering group, it doesn't have powers to direct, it doesn't have funds to actually, it doesn't have the direction though, powers that it needs. Are you happy that, because one of the things I was thinking of that the recommendation could have been, we could have asked the executive to review the TORs in terms of what our priorities were. But can you give us reassurance that the new TORs meet our priorities at this stage or not? Or would that be a useful recommendation?
We were involved in the drafting of the TRs and indeed the whole of the re-governance process. And it was quite long and involved, and we also were we had the other local authorities very involved as well. So it was a properly consulted on piece of work. And I think for me, if Herefordshire Council's primary interest is the fitness of the plan to address the issue of nutrient neutrality, then that I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. Just because it's really hard to find measures of reasonable scientific certainty where agricultural diffuse pollution is concerned. It's just really difficult. So where I'm satisfied with the change of emphasis within the board, because when I look around and I think, so where do I see a positive, actual, substantial action taking place? One is the incredible contribution being made by citizen science. Now we have, the fat end of 1,000 people, I think, doing that. It's extraordinary. The temporal and spatial data on this catchment is above and beyond anything else nationally. It's incredible. And the other thing is the response of the supply chain. Now, if you trace both of those things back, you have to say this is people power. And so what the board has done is become more inclusive to those groups, to say, please come with us, because they are actually generating very real activity that I think will bring about solutions, and those solutions have to be agreed by those people as well. So I'm very content with that that kind of change of emphasis within the board. But I think Rachel might have a different point of view on the from the point of view of the terms of reference and whether there's any other changes that we would like to see as a council.
Rachel, do you want to comment at this stage on that possible recommendation that we could ask the executive to look again at the TORs in the light of our priorities for the rivers?
I mean, following the Mark Bennett report, which led to discussions with the national agencies on both sides of the border and led into the government's review, we have a new terms of reference. I think what I would have liked to have seen is a more structured approach embedded into it in terms of what the nutrient management plan might look like. But I'm also accepting of the fact that it's a partnership document, and it has to match partner aspirations as well as the council's aspirations. And on that basis, collectively the board came to a view that that is the right terms of reference for now, and that we should create some space for the statutory officers group to get on and revise the plan. And actually, at this stage, I would probably encourage Scrutiny not to make recommendations on the terms of and reopen that debate, because it was actually quite a heated debate, as you can imagine. The river generates a lot of heat. And actually, we focus on how we can support the statutory officers group in its difficult task in a resource constrained world, with different aspirations on both sides of the border, different aspirations from different communities, to actually deliver a more effective plan. And I think, that now is the time probably not to think so much about governance in the local sense of the board, but to actually get behind moving to the next stage, which is how we build a stronger plan.
Councillor Highfield, then Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, this question of whether or not it's a board or a steering group is moot if the decisions and recommendations of the board are taken very seriously by the other people involved, i.e. it doesn't matter that they don't have authority if they're seriously listened to. Would that be the case, Alyssa?
Yeah, and also actually there's another part of the board that, there are partners on the board who are crucial to the delivery of actions that might be identified within the plan. So specifically the work that's being done by the Wyask Foundation or the Rural Hub, Farm Herefordshire Rural Hub. I think, so the statutory agencies cannot fix this on their own, but they can write the plan, but the delivery of some elements of the plan will sit with partners on the board. So the board can advise and guide and indeed hopefully be also there to ask questions when things are not happening. So that separation, as it were, between church and state, or between the statutory agencies and the board, is helpful, because it gives that bit of space that we can look at what they're doing with the plan and the delivery of the plan. But we also have people on the board who will be delivering elements of the plan and putting in advice about this action will be better than that action, or we have now learnt something about legacy phosphate or land drains or whatever, the role of different things, ammonia. We're learning all the time about this. So I think the thinking on the board is important, and I think the statutory agencies would know that. But what they wanted, as Rachel's correctly said, is a space to work separate from the board, and actually I think that's quite constructive. Another thing that's a change within the board's terms of reference, and it's a new thing which we're still trying to kind of figure out how it's going to work, is we've made space on the board for the river, which is the concept of personhood, of rights for the river, and we're working now with the US Catchment Partnership to make that real. And so that's very innovative. So the board is continually improving and innovating and seeing how do we do things differently. But at the same time, we have guidance come through from Welsh Government. We don't have equivalent from English Government, but from Welsh Government, what their expectations are around the way in which the board will relate to their structures and what their expectations of the board are. So that has to also be incorporated within the way the board functions.
Just before I bring Councillor Thomas in, I will remind the meeting that we're focusing on the council here and what the council's objectives and needs are from the NMB. I do accept all the contextual comments that have been made. I think they're very helpful. I'm absorbing them. I'm sure the committee members are absorbing them. But at the end of the day, we are here as a scrutiny committee for the council, and we have to determine what the best way forward is from a council's perspective in terms of our involvement in the NMB.
I have to disagree with one item you just said there, but statutory boards can, if they wanted to, fix the problem. We all know what the problem is. There's a combination basically of two things, is agriculture and sewerage. But so I'll leave that on, because that's not really council. Well, except maybe the sewerage thing is. But I think we are, like so many now, I've been on all the various scrutiny committees now. There's far too much rhetorical and not enough looking forward as to what we really can do. I know you've got to learn, you learn from your lessons from your past, but it's very, the marvellous river meeting that we had, just over a month ago, there was more action, there was more forward thinking in that afternoon than I've probably seen so far on any council committee. And it's taking a lot of actions. We know now that a lot of the chicken muck is going to be taken out of the county. If that's starting very soon, I believe, May, isn't it? April, May? January, okay. So we should see a very, very quick drop in phosphate in the water. But we need to be a little bit less rhetorical, I think, and sort of trying to sort of see where we can go, and what we as a council can actually, where we can bring about change. Quite frankly, the only change really that we can control is planning. And that is a very hot potato, because we are duty bound to build countless number more houses. And yet we cannot get rid of the waste efficiently, or Welsh Water can't. So
we need to move on, because we've got 16 questions. I could see that the view from everyone is that we leave the TORs as they are now because they've just been developed. I'm still concerned that it is through the TORs you drive the direction of the particular organisation that is actually having to meet those TORs. But I'll take the reassurance from you, Councillor Swinglehurst, that we won't have a recommendation on the TORs at the moment. But I'm still concerned, and Councillor Thomas, I think I would not constrain our responsibilities too much, because we have responsibilities for things like economic growth. It's not just housing. You've got the tourist economy, which is far bigger than any other economy sector in the county. So there are issues there that go beyond planning in terms of actually making the county still attractive to tourism. But I want to move on now, because I think we're going to never get through the 16 questions. Going on to the third question, and I think it's good that the committee looked at the TORs, looked at the Contents Board, and determined that there was no recommendation to come from that. Because too often in committees we can just let it drift, and I think we've come to a conscious decision there. And I do want that recorded in the minutes, Clerk. This rotation of the chair that was meant to happen, Councillor Swinglehurst, could someone ask me why we as a council have spent all the time and effort running the board without any of the other partners coming forward to chair it? Because I'm thinking of putting a recommendation forward here, so I'd be glad to get your views on why this was never triggered.
I think initially it was us, and then in 2019 there was a suggestion that it should rotate between us and Paris. The following meeting was the first meeting that I attended. The Paris member was not in attendance, although it was actually in their offices. And the vote for chair was due at that meeting. Herefordshire Council were therefore the last to step back, and we wound up chairing it. And we've carried on chairing it. I now have the excellent Councillor Charlton vice chairing, and she's Paris, trying to level up the Welsh English interest within the board, with the point that Christine was making, which is exactly right. I mean, there is an issue there. But currently, the other local authorities are not prepared to take on the chairing.
Does it have to be a local council chair?
I think the decision was that it should be an elected person in order to ensure democratic accountability.
Councillor Davis.
Does the chairmanship of the NMB give us any advantages?
Well, I don't know, not really. I don't think we don't get free biscuits. No, we haven't got a budget for biscuits. I guess you know, potentially because we can set an agenda and control the agenda and control the meeting. That could be seen as an advantage, but as chair, I try to be responsive to all the partners on the board, and if they want to bring an item forward, you know, I do my best to make sure that we've got space on the agenda to hear that item. So I don't think we particularly do.
I was just wondering if that's all. If we could drive sensible discussions to move things forward, this all, and I appreciate that obviously you have that capacity as the chair to do that, but I just wanted to know if we had any favourable outputs from it. That's all.
And of course, the governance has changed, Councillor Davis, with the statutory officer group being formed and the NMB now becoming just advisory. I do think I want to stick with the recommendation that we ask the executive to look at whether we should rescind the chairmanship and pass it on to someone else at this stage. Because it's our council taxpayers that are footing the bill here, and I just feel that if there's a requirement in there to have the chair rotated from time to time, then we should certainly ask the executive to look at it. Councillor Hine.
Yeah, if all else was equal, I'd go along with that. But I'm going to embarrass her now. It's serendipitous that we've got Councillor Swinglehurst, and I think there's nobody within 100 miles who could do a better job. So for as long as she's willing to do it, we forget about the big picture and just say, yeah, you get on with it.
It shouldn't be personal, Councillor Highfield, from this committee's point of view. We can look at the recommendation because it is only asking the executive to look at it. If they come back and say, while Councillor Swinglehurst is chair, that we would back staying as chair, but there's a cost to it, and we're providing the secretariat as well, and we'll be looking at VFM afterwards. So I just feel that we should ask the executive to at least look at it. But you could be right, they can come back and say, no, we're happy with the current arrangements. But yes, it shouldn't be personal though. It should be down to whether the council wants to chair it or not. Councillor Davis?
Chair, could you just please clarify the cost involved? Because if we're still a committee member, should really make that much difference, I'd have thought. Could you just clarify that, please?
Well, I think we provide the secretariat as well. I don't know what the cost is involved in it.
I think the provision of the secretariat is relatively recent. Certainly from 2014 through to 2020 or thereabouts, we would have officers attending the board, as you would with any partnership board or committee that we're on, and they would take notes, and that was pretty much, you know, the secretariat, and would set up the next meeting. So it was very unstructured in that respect. But then from 2020, that's become more structured, which is really, really helpful. We've now got kind of proper democratic services support, yes, so presumably there is some cost to that, but meetings are run virtually, so that we don't have the room costs and all those extra complications or travel expenses or anything like that. So I think the costs are probably not all that immense, to be fair, and a certain amount of it would be happening anyway because we'd be attending anyway as members, partners on the board.
Rachel, do you want to comment on this?
Chair, briefly, we have secured Welsh Government grant for the 5 meetings that followed from January of this year. I think the Secretariat support is £3,000 to £4,000, and that is actually being funded by Welsh Government grant. So there is the immediate pressure is off, but the wider issue comes back after April 25.
We could still ask, because in a way, why has Herefordshire shouldered this burden for 10 years? And it does raise the issue about this as a partnership, and it does put the focus back on the Welsh side and others, that sometimes that they may want to be in the lead as well.
I think, Mr. Chairman, because probably Herefordshire makes more out of the Y in the sense of holidays, etc., etc. It's probably worth more to us to keep the Y clean. So I suspect that's why, economics really.
Yeah, going back to the bigger picture, probably Herefordshire, because the original identification of a problem was the lug catchment. But I've never seen it acknowledged that a great deal of the lug is in Wales. It rises in Wales. And did they ever identify? I mean, we've heard that it was 2020 before Wales really began to acknowledge that they had a major problem with the Y. Have they ever acknowledged what's the state of the lug when it arrives in Herefordshire? And the limitations on development from the planning point of view have cost this county a huge amount of money. It's estimated at £200 million lost GDP in northern Herefordshire. Have the Welsh Government, talking in favour of the county, have the Welsh Government ever offered us compensation for that? Because they have been polluting our rivers.
I mean, I'm inclined to put the recommendation before you, because it's up to the executive then, but there is this issue that we've heard from others about the imbalance between the partnership at times, and I think we should ask others to stand up with counties sometimes. But if the executive turns it down, then fine. I just feel it's a missed opportunity not to, at least as a committee, to put the recommendation forward that we should seriously look at it.
Because as elected councillors, we can say undiplomatic things, something like I've just said, whereas it's a bit difficult for council officers and official people from agencies and so on. But it was Natural England that identified the problem originally, or at least made it a public issue, and that's probably why it came down to us. And it was never, I mean, Wales weren't in it, they weren't in the race until much later, apparently.
Okay, we'll move on, but I think we'll put the recommendation on the list, and then we can consider it as a committee.
But Chairman, just to reassure you though that this particular topic was very much debated as we were looking at the re-governance, and it eventually fell to the board itself to make a determination over what they wanted to do with the chairing of the board, because there was a division of view on that, and the majority view on the board was that they wanted me to remain as chair. Powys were invited to take the chair, as were Monmouthshire, and they declined.
But there's no harm having it on the record that that is the case, and that the executive sticks with that, because at the end of the day, we have to have that audit trail that we as a committee have at least asked the question.
And if there's a cost of secretariat, for example, or other things, why isn't that not shared?
Yeah.
Well, it's being offset by money from Welsh Government at the moment, so we're not meeting the cost.
Christine, you want to come in, and then I'll move on from this question.
I just wanted to say how unhelpful in this context. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
How unhelpful in this context the idea of compensation for the cost of the housing moratorium in Hereford to be met by Wales or Powys is really, because there's also a housing moratorium in Powys, and both counties are contributing to the agricultural diffuse pollution, which is damaging the Y. Both in England and Wales, there's responsibility to nature and to natural resources. And actually, from our citizen science work on the Y, the worst excesses in terms of soluble phosphate are definitely in Herefordshire. But I don't think the blame game is the way to go forward. If we're going forward, surely we're going together with a catchment-based approach.
Thank you, Christine. Right, we'll move on to questions 4 to 6, which Councillor Thomas is going to lead on, so you don't always have to hear my voice.
Nothing wrong with your wonderful Scottish voice. Do you want me to do all one at a time? Yeah, okay. Why did the original MMB emphasise economic growth as a primary factor in its design?
Simon?
Your 2014 core strategy was dependent upon it.
That's a very concise question, easily understood as well. Thank you very much. Was there too much emphasis on planning in it as well?
Your 2014 core strategy and development of planning was dependent upon it.
Can I just come in then, Councillor Thomas? This is one of the issues I've got with this whole process in terms of no focus exactly on the river and the nutrient failing of the river has been one of the concerns I've had. And I don't know whether committee members, you want to explore that, because it seems to me that's a very narrow focus for the NMB, which is a nutrient management board.
So
sorry,
Councillor Thomas. I'm just going to slightly build on what Simon's saying. He's right. Obviously, the timing of it, the core strategy was coming through the pipeline, and it was a very major focus, and also the moratorium. There was it's quite right. It was a temporary moratorium. We needed to get that changed, and therefore the plan needed to do that. But the stated aim of the plan is to recover the river to favourable conservation status, which is a very broad term. It's not just nutrients, favourable conservation status by 2027, and to map out how that was going to be done to the satisfaction of the examiner, having incorporated the development within the plan period. So it did have, from the council's point of view, our focus was on the core strategy and development. But from the plan's point of view, that was only going to be possible if it could demonstrate favourable conservation status could be achieved by 2027.
What I could never understand on this one, we put a moratorium on building. Now, as a retired builder, building a housing estate is not going to put a minute amount of phosphate into the water. What will put phosphate into the water is all the sewerage coming out of all those houses. Now, was that the reason? Because, yes, I do know that is my subject. I do know about building, and it would be a minute amount, which could be very, very easily contained during the construction. So did we have a moratorium to stop A or B?
B. It's not the actual construction, it's the consequential increase in sewage. And the difference now is that, and why we can't resolve the moratorium at the moment, other than through mitigation, is subsequent to the Dutch cases. Basically, you cannot have a plan to get something sorted by 2027 if the impact is going to be now. So that's a major shift in the legal framework around this issue, which is why the nutrient management plan is no longer functioning as the bulwark against a moratorium, which it was able to achieve in 2014.
Sorry, on you come.
So can I ask then, the figures that were produced at your river conference, the sewerage works at Leominster will have phosphate stripping fully in action sometime this year. Will that moratorium then immediately end? Because that's your problem.
No, because our understanding has deepened, as it were, over time. So the initial, what we call source apportionment of the problem was roughly 50-50, and it's now close to 70-25, 25 being the sewage treatment works. So literally, if nobody ever flushed a toilet again in Herefordshire, we would still have a problem with the river. We've got to deal with the agricultural diffuse pollution element and the legacy phosphorus element, because all the new building it would be contributing something like 0.023%. So you know 0.2%. It's like teeny weeny amount. It's not. It really is not going to make any difference. Herefordshire Council quickly recognised the time lag of waiting for measures of reasonable scientific certainty to address this, and therefore started to look at direct mitigation and phosphate credits just to alleviate that problem. But it's not it's not the solution. It's to alleviate that particular issue.
The point is phosphate stripping, and it strips to a concentration. So, as an example, a person moving into a house will emit, according to Dura Cymru's figures, 477 grams of phosphorus as soluble reactive phosphorus per year that will go out through the sewage system. If there is a phosphate stripper, as for example there is at Leominster, then that impact is reduced to circa 80 grams. But there is still an impact, and that's the problem of the no deterioration rule. If there's no deterioration, even if you put someone in, whether they're putting in 477 or 80 grams, there's still an impact. What the phosphate stripping does is it potentially creates headroom if they strip more than their legal requirement. So they have a the water company have a legal requirement that's set by the statutory bodies on the improvements that they are going to make. If they do more than that, then that can be used for offsetting, but only if they do more than their legal requirement, and that has a cost associated with it, and where that cost falls is the determinant.
Right, I've got Christine, Liz, and then Rachel. Christine.
Thank you. I think we have to take into account that since 2014, there were many intensive livestock farms which went through planning and were approved. And as Alyssa Swinglehurst once said in one of the nutrient management board meetings, if you look at the amount of phosphate that potentially contributes to the Y compared to the number of houses that have been held up, it's a total disproportion. So there's been a kind of problem, and I understand that these are very difficult problems to deal with in the difference between housing and agricultural change. And I suppose this is a thing for the future. But when we say, was there too much emphasis on planning, only in part of planning.
Okay. Thank you. I'll do Liz and then Rachel, then we'll come back to you, Richard.
Yeah, so I was just going to go back to Simon's point about the phosphate stripper on the Leominster works. So that has been included as part of AMP7 by Welsh Water, and that has been factored into the nutrient budget calculator. So the developer will have to offset or mitigate less phosphate load than prior to the phosphate stripper being introduced.
Rachel?
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I want to return to the wider question we started with about economic development. And I think that comes back to the point of your meeting this morning, which is what does the council want? And actually, in the real world that we face, we can't just look at the river in isolation. If we make policy choices that are totally for the river, then there are consequences for land use management. For example, if farming becomes unviable, who will manage the land? How will the land be managed? And actually, there's a need for an evolution. So, that then feeds through to an impact on national food security in a world that is globally stressed in terms of food security, and increasingly so. And then we have to factor in things like climate change and the impact of climate change. So I think it comes back to what does the council want? Now, looking at the discussion this morning, this is obviously a review of what has happened with the Nutrient Management Board since 2014. And that's a good and a right thing to do, but I can see and hear frustrations from members to be forward looking. And Chair, you might want to think about a future meeting of this important committee, what is happening in the Y in terms of initiatives and how they fit together. But you're right to think, what does the council need? And the council obviously needs to think about its community responsibilities, its housing responsibilities, its support of the local economy, and it is much wider than the river, as important as it is, and no matter how much we would love to see a healthy river, we need to think through the consequences of favouring one policy objective over another.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, I totally agree, Rachel, on what you just said. This is the, but it's trying to solve these problems. We stopped development in the lug, yet we are increasing development on the Y. We know that the sewage works at Leominster, whatever percentage it takes out, is working, will be working this year. From the Rivers Conference, there was no figures from Hereford at all. No, well, we'll have this done by the 1st of April, whenever. Nothing at all. So why are we pushing more houses into the directly into the Y and none into the lug? If you're going to stop one, you must stop both.
Rachel?
Chair, yeah, the lug is failing its phosphate targets, the Y is not, and that's why the Y is allowed to actually proceed with development at the moment. But I think, to answer the question, potentially we're looking at a generation before we will see river recovery. The fields around the Y are absolutely saturated with phosphate that is built up over decades because of the post-Second World War expansion, because of the need to produce food for the nation. The welcome news from the supply chain is it's turning the taps off at the top, but there are, it takes probably a decade to reduce, a field by one Olsen level. And many of them are several levels above what is needed. So even if we turn off the taps today, and it's important that we look to turning off the taps today to help the river, we need to be real with ourselves and with our communities about how long this is going to take to sort out.
Councillor Swingwas?
Thank you. So I think what Councillor Thomas is getting at is why they're investing in Leominster and not in Hereford. Overall, Welsh Water invested about £60 million in the catchment for phosphate reduction, and that includes investments at Ain and also at Rotherwas. So they are investing in Hereford, and what else we got? Kingston, Madley, Pontrilas, Webley. So there's a whole kind of raft of measures that they're taking.
Simon, did you want to come in at this stage?
I just want to say that the key one here for development in the middle of Herefordshire is Kingston and Madley actually getting a phosphate stripper. So you can, if you haven't got a failing work, if that part of the river isn't failing, taking it, the fact that they're stripping it down to 2 now is creating the space for expansion and planning expansion in that area.
And then, sorry, if I can just come back. One of the things that I came across going, again for this meeting was this, which is a 2020 paper from the Technical Advisory Group, which is looking forward at the what we call fully permitted scenario for PR19, at which point the load to be removed after the Cymru have done their investment at the point of, I think it's Morderford Bridge, is 1.129 kilograms a day, and agriculture as a whole is responsible for around 90% of the remaining deficit. So the point is that there'll be a moment when Der Cymru have made their investment, when they're then trying to shrink a tiny puddle, and they'll run out of things to do, and they're pretty much getting to that point anyway. That the cost for them of taking out this last little teeny weeny bit when there's this absolute mountain of it coming in from agriculture is disproportionate. So the solution has to sit with agriculture.
Was there too much emphasis on measurement by the MMB rather than delivery of mitigating actions to reduce nutrient overload?
Simon?
No, there was a lot of action came out of the original NMB. You had the Safeguarding Soils programme. You had a significant increase in EA enforcement. We then, when basic rules came around for agriculture, we thought we were on a winner, and then there was the instruction from government that it was unreasonable to enforce them. And the efforts that have been made through the board to circumvent that, because it was just when you're in a phosphorus surplus scenario, and that surplus is entirely being generated by manures, then it is genuinely unreasonable to enforce, because you can't. It's very costly to get the manures out of the system, because they cost a lot of money to move. But what we've done through the partnership, through working with the supply chain, is we've solved that problem, which hopefully, and this is all work that's come through the partners of the board, which then enables the government to take off the unreasonable to enforce rule for the application of fertilisers, or over application of fertilisers. Then that allows the Environment Agency to implement basic rules and wind back the fertiliser application. So you can see there's a chain of events that need to happen here, and this is what's come through the activities of the board to try and solve the problem.
Yeah, it's funny because in life I wear 2 hats, because 40 years I was farming. Phosphate was something that we used very, very sparingly, simply because every time we had our land, and we were on sort of Herefordshire loam, sandstone, there was plenty in the soil. And of course, one of the big problems that's caused all this is the fact that the Devonian sandstone is very high in phosphate. It always has been and always will be. So apart from potatoes, there aren't many other crops that you put a heck of a lot of phosphate. You do have to put quite a bit of phosphate on. But as regards most other crops, and I grew a very broad range of crops, a lot of vegetables as well, we did not put much phosphate in. It was mainly nitrogen and potash. But it's no doubt that it is actually poultry manure, because at the end of the day we have this, we have to get rid of it. It's a major problem. It's been a major problem to farmers, and of course, as we know, farmers have been sort of giving it almost, well, in lots of cases, giving it to their neighbours who. And I think the general feeling I get now, because I'm also still in an agricultural club, is that attitudes are very much changing, especially in what I call my area, which is the Ross area, as regards potatoes, in getting them away from the river. That's where your big problem is. That's where your bag fertilizer gets into the river because of that. So I think so question on that one is, will we, as soon as we hope the phosphate level starts dropping quickly in the river, if we start moving all this poultry manure out, 500,000 tonnes out of the system, will we be looking at reducing our moratoriums or even scrapping them altogether?
We did some work on the loss through the land drains and the loss of the legacy P through the land drains funded by the Environment Agency. They've taken it on and are going further with it. And yeah, okay, sorry. I've never had a problem with being heard before. I think the point here is that the loss, as Rachel has correctly said, there is a significant amount of, I hate the word significant, there is a lot of phosphorus in our soils as a result of over-application for a period of time that was accelerated as the poultry, it was accelerated as more and more feed came into feed-intensive livestock, both poultry and other sectors. That seems to be released by aggressive cultivation. So on our land drain monitoring, when you aggressively cultivate the soil, you get a release of phosphorus that comes out because you break up the organic matter that comes through it. So the crops that are generating the aggressive cultivation, say for example potatoes, say for example deep ploughing, or power harrowing, or the various things that break up the soil, those are the ones that you then get a flush of phosphorus coming out through the land drain following that event. So if we're dealing with the legacy problem, and this is the issue with phosphorus being sticky in the soil and the Devonian sandstones, it sticks to clay and it sticks to life. In the Devonian sandstones, you don't have a lot of clay, so you're relying on life to hold the phosphorus in the soils. And if you destroy the life, you then get the release through the land drains. So there's a whole series of, and then this then ties in with what companies like McCain's are doing and other potato growers through the supply chain of trying to farm in a more sustainable way by 2030. So we can harness that when we come to the delivery, we can harness that to try and solve the problem. But there's going to be no quick fix, I'm afraid, from the manures coming out. It's going to solve the problem getting worse, but it's not going to fix the actual losses that we're getting at the moment.
Councillor Swinglehurst?
Yeah, I think again it's sort of been part of the focus of the board to focus parts of the board to improve the understanding and to get this conversation going within agriculture, and I think it's really nice that you're clearly reflecting that, which is great. The issue of potatoes, is there an answer? Yes, there is, and it's regenerative. So I'm looking at a set of figures which tells me that we're a field trial where you've got 3 different ways of growing potatoes, conventional through to fully regen, and the poorest pot Olsen P average for the conventional potato, in other words how much phosphate is being lost through the soil, 72.7 milligrams versus 0.06 milligrams in the fully regen potato. The cost of production difference is £111 conventional versus £46 regen, so you double your profit margin. And it's a lot less work, obviously, because you haven't got to go spray them 14 times. So, this is the future. The future is changing the culture of farming with the heritage, get everyone onto this low-till, different way of producing crops, increase the profitability, and much healthier for the river. This is work for the board. It's not a Herefordshire Council thing, but it's something that the board can bring forward and support the partners on the board that are doing that work.
Problem of that is, though, you reduce your crop, your yield.
No, the yield in this case is 52.8 versus 49.3. So it's a marginal difference in yield, but double the profit margin.
And will you still get the quality for people like McCain's and supermarkets?
But the trials are being done for a major potato company.
Good.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Rachel?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Part of the work that we've been doing with DEFRA, which we've stepped back from because it's not our core business now, was actually around developing new tools for measuring phosphate in field and better understanding how phosphates move through the fields into the river system, because it's quite a complex set of processes. And actually that work, is being trialled. It's tying into sort of the cultural change that is taking place in farming. But as Councillor Thomas has referred to, there is a need to think about the kind of crops that are planted, but also the kinds of seeds that are used. So a lot of the new seeds are actually, fast food junkies when it comes to phosphate, and some of the traditional seeds require less and do more work with the soil. When we get through the soil and the legacy P in the soil system, there is also an awful lot of phosphate that has already been deposited into the river that is actually sitting there, not doing anything. And as you as you reduce the level of phosphate in soil on land, you could potentially see an increase in that phosphate activity of the stuff that is deposited in the river. This is probably the first time in human history. Most of the problem with human history is that we've actually had too few nutrients in our soil, and we've depleted and destroyed our soils. This is probably the first time in human history where we're actually having to manage too much nutrient in soil. There is a series of complex processes that, if we don't manage each phase properly, from turning off the taps in the supply to the soil, how that works through and what is happening into the river, we could have a series of unintended consequences at each of those stages. So it's important that we work with the agencies to move sequentially to get it right. There are no quick fixes to this problem, but there is a lot that is happening now, and there's a lot more that we could be doing now as a community to actually address these issues.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas, for taking us through those three questions. I think the questions themselves were set to try and help the debate going forward in the committee, but I think what they're also doing is they're actually throwing up issues that I wasn't aware of, or actions that I wasn't aware of, that is actually happening. So some of the other questions have probably already been answered. But on question 7, did we ever think at any stage, given that this has been a 10-year long process, the NMB, of ever seeking an alternative to the NMB to actually progress our own council priorities here, such as the housing moratorium on the Lug, for example?
Not as such. I mean, I think we've looked at the forming cabinet commission, which was about kind of bringing a political joined up approach with our local authority neighbours. But the overall nutrient management board, not really. I don't think so. There's a lot of activity in this area. We've got the catchment partnership as well. And although it looks like everyone's doing the same thing, there are kind of clear differences between those three bodies. The council, Herefordshire Council, trying to deal with a specific issue, the moratorium, had to identify what is the most efficient way of dealing with that, and that's not waiting for the nutrient management plan to reach reasonable scientific certainty. And therefore, the smart thing was to work with a partner on the board, the Wiles Foundation, and develop mitigation that was going to work. So we were the first to do that, as I understand, nationally and potentially globally, to use constructed integrated wetland to release phosphate credits.
We will be going on to that after, and I think that is the reason why I had that question later on about wetlands, everything else, is that if we were putting all our potatoes in one basket rather than eggs with the NMB, my worry is we might have actually lost focus in terms of actually pushing our priorities forward through some other way of actually progressing them, which could have been, as you say, a cross-border partnership. It could have been some sort of political initiative through lobbying government, everything else. And I think that's quite important. Someone like me who hears about the NMB, certainly when I was first elected, thought, that's the route by which we will get river recovery. But it's not proven like that. That's not what's happening here. And I think we will have to think about, well, where does the NMB go from here if we've got all these and other initiatives going? But I think that answers that question about why we've ended up pursuing wetlands as well, is because there must have been something lacking in the NMB that we haven't been able to get the NMB to deliver those solutions for us. Or is that unfair? Simon, and then...
We couldn't solve the problem of diffuse pollution in the time that would allow for the housing to develop. So, and wetlands offered the opportunity for certainty because of the data that was happening, that was coming out of the Ingol, and the data that was coming out of some other wetlands in the UK. I saw the opportunity and we pushed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, it's the other thing is that twin track, the favourable conservation status is still the overall aim, and it's only if we can get reasonable certainty around that we could use that as a way of alleviating the moratorium. But Simon said, when you're dealing with agricultural diffuse pollution, that's incredibly difficult. So, you know, in a sense, the Nutrient Management Board has already taken the low-hanging fruit, or where certainty can be found. That's already done, and we're now sort of desperately trying to find a way of bringing certainty to actions to reduce agricultural diffuse pollution.
I'll go back to wetlands after. Councillor Highfield.
Yeah, we've got two separate problems really. We've got the legacy, and then we've got turning off the taps, and I presume they're being followed in parallel. When it comes to turning off the taps, we heard in the Rivers Conference that there's some quite exciting developments done by private companies and by volunteer organisations. One of them was the use of chicken manure to power units. Very successful small-scale trial that they wanted to expand, and the company that this power was being supplied to very desperately wanted it to be expanded. And yet it took the Environment Agency over 4 months to find one officer to actually look at the proposal because it needed approval. Now, if we're going to have those sort of delays every time there's a new idea, then we're really going to be taking a lot of time to deal with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Highfield. We've already answered question 8, so I'm not going to ask that again. Did you want to come in, Councillor Swingers?
Yeah, I think that point just made by Councillor Highfield is a very good one, and that maybe that might be something that could start a recommendation around where a technical solution is being offered, that statutory consultation is done, you know, with a degree of urgency, if at all possible.
What do you mean by statutory consultations?
With the delay with the Environment Agency over that application.
But who's going to lead in that? We have to ask the executive.
So the Environment Services within the council has recently set up an environmental advice service that will look at private mitigation schemes for developers, and we are also offering the opportunity to engage with the statutory agencies, so Natural England Environment Agency, as part of this process to ensure that they are content with the proposals that are brought forward, because they act as a statutory consultee as part of the planning service. So if these schemes are brought forward to offset planning, then we need to be content that Natural England is happy with what is being proposed as well. So there is now an opportunity to review these schemes.
So how would we address the recommendation to the executive then? That's what I'm trying to get at. We would ask the executive to... Yes,
I think we would need to highlight the service that we're now offering and ask them to prioritise that and ensure they have the resource to review those proposals.
So the service is called?
The Environmental Advice Service.
Right.
Yeah, can we... I mean, I'd never heard of it, and if I've never heard of it, then
we
probably
need
the people out there that are doing this
I'm
haven't
quite
heard of it
happy
either.
to spend some time here on a recommendation. So the recommendation would be that we would ask the executive to look again at the resources that are being put into the
Environmental advice service. So we've developed the environmental advice service in-house,
yeah.
and we will provide advice to developers on their private mitigation schemes. We approach Natural England and the Environment Agency independently before we set up the service to ask if they would want to work as a joint service. They advised us they didn't have the resource at that point in time, so we now need to go through their established pre-application process. So it would be useful to highlight, I think, the service that we have now set up,
Yeah.
and ask them if they can prioritise their responses.
And we, sorry,
I'm
yes.
sorry to keep on about this. I think it's brilliant, but have you any evidence yet that your participation in this with Natural England and the Environment Agency has speeded them up, has focused their attention on an issue? Have you got any example cases that have worked so far?
So it is a very new service. We have only
We don't know yet.
We have only just established it,
Okay.
so it would be interesting to run the pilot scheme through and report back.
So we're asking the executive to look at the resources that are available for the new environmental advice service within the council, to ensure that they are properly resourced to react in a prompt way to any private mitigation initiatives that might arise.
We need to add, and that the statutory agencies are responding promptly to that cooperation.
Okay, and there we'll finish it with that. Are you catching that, Clark? I think it's important when we have recommendations on the table that we don't just shorthand them. Too often committees we say, yeah, we'll have a recommendation that, then we come to the end and we're all rushing around trying to put it together, which just does not work in my view.
I mean, that's the best thing I've heard this morning, honestly, it is.
Come on, Councillor Highfield. After all my questions. How to put the chair down in one easy question. I will continue crestfallen. All right, thanks for that. That's excellent. I think that's a very good recommendation, and one that we might not have got.
As well, isn't it? So
It's one of them. It's one of them. I think we've had a lot of good information exchange this morning already. It's been excellent. Yeah, question 9. I don't want to be too critical, but do you think the NMB has spent too much time creating plans and not enough in actually creating some sort of action plan for delivery? Simon.
I know it can feel like that sometimes, but actually thinking about it, there was the initial nutrient management plan, which is a 3-part, the evidence-based and options proposal and the action plan, which in 2014. Now that was due for revision in 2019. It got derailed by the Dutch cases and all the stuff that was going on there. So it didn't actually then get reiterated until 2021. It came out as a phosphate action plan and should have been then refreshed within the 12-month period, but it wasn't. So in reality, you've had a plan in 2014 which was refreshed in 2021. It's not all that much planning, really. So I don't think that we're not seeing too much plan. But what we do need is to make sure that plan, and I think this is where we're struggling, that once you've taken care of the known knowns, the Welsh water investments and so on and so forth, once you're starting to try to get actions within a plan that can be delivered to a reasonable scientific certainty that covers off agricultural diffuse pollution, it becomes a very difficult plan to write.
The problem is the plan is a fixed point in time in a rapidly evolving situation. So that's been the problem with the planning and the effort. There probably could have been more effort and resource put into catching data from the third sector and from what farmers are doing and what from other organisations are doing. But it was beholden upon the organisations feeding the information in, which was one of the limitations.
do you want to capture? Oh, sorry, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, it's part of the issue here that the problem that directed us to form the NMB in the first place, the information coming through now, we have a far better understanding of what the problems are, and it's trying to find the right resolution. So, and it's the second order and third order decisions of how we respond to that that's now influencing how the plan's going to work. So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And what Simon's saying about, you know, the problem is we're trying to write a plan which is a static thing against a background that is rapidly evolving, where our understanding is rapidly evolving, where the supply chain are doing, you know, really significant things like removing, you know, tens of thousands of tons of litter out of the catchment, and that needs to be quantified. It needs to be understood. What's the impact of that going to be? Is that something that could go in the plan? What would the phosphate reduction be of that action and whatever? So you can't just kind of bop it in the plan and go, right, that's the thing. You have to actually understand what the consequences are, and is that to a reasonable scientific certainty, the outcome of that? Because obviously that's difficult, because, you know, so you might import a load of poultry litter from Shropshire. Yeah, who knows? Just because you're exporting tens of thousands of tons, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will have less, because it might come in from somewhere else. So that this is the difficulty. If I say what's the ideal plan, it's something that's really dynamic. That almost, you know, every time the Nutrient Management Board meets, you get new ideas and projects coming in. You know, you've got landscape recovery. We need to measure that. What's that going to look like? What's it going to produce? What's the potential outcome of that? So there's you know, it's trying to capture this very, very lively, dynamic situation in a plan is difficult if the plan is set at a point in time, because it's almost out of date the minute the ink is dry.
It's very useful. Christine, you want to come in?
Just to state the obvious, really, is it's even more difficult to have a plan when you've got two different governments producing legislation at a sort of at different rates, and you know, you've got the farming rules for water, and you've got the Welsh agriculture pollution rules for water, both of which are there on different sides of the border, and which amendments and changes into implementation dates and so on are happening, and we haven't got a DWP yet, and so everybody is working. Even the Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales don't actually control what's coming down from the government, and then there's their ability to enforce what is coming down. So it is difficult. I mean, you know, I agree completely with Alyssa and Simon about trying to make a plan on the hoof when there's so much change.
Simon?
I've just had an idea of how the plan could be improved, is almost to separate the plan into two streams. One stream is to enable housing with certainty and support the actions that will do that. And the other stream is to recover the river that doesn't chase certainty. It just supports the... I'll turn my phone off, sorry. I thought I'd turn my phone off. Sorry. The other one is to have a series of actions that supports initiatives and works out how the council and the people that are on the board can facilitate those initiatives that will bring the river back over time.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I've got a recommendation down about being clearer in our business objectives for the board. That sort of generic recommendation, from what you're saying, Simon, and from the nodding that you're doing, Councillor Swinghurst, that could feed through you into giving you the sort of, I think, the power to actually go forward in the NMB and try and do that, if we had that as a recommendation. It's a generic recommendation about our business priorities and KPIs that I had already sort of thought through.
Yeah,
I didn't want to be too specific, because I don't really know what the answer is. It needs to be worked through, as you're saying, Simon, as well, as to what we want from the NAB moving forward.
Yeah, but I think I agree with Simon. This is something that we have kind of, you know, knocked around a little bit at the board, is splitting the plan between reasonable scientific certainty, moratorium planning actions, and health of the river actions, which do not have to reach that same benchmark if we're not saying that the plan overall is the mitigation. But and that's certainly something that I think we should take up with the statutory officer group. The other conversation, I guess, would be to talk to our local authority neighbours through the Cabinet Commission and say, well, what, how do they feel about it? Because they've got the same problem, as it were. I mean, we're all in the same boat with this. So if we, as members of the board, with all requiring scientific certainty within the plan, all agree that, in fact, the plan needs to have layers to differentiate, then that would seem to be quite a constructive way forward. So the recommendation might be for the executive to take that up with the Cabinet Commission and talk to our local authority neighbours and with the statutory officer group to see if we can get that to bed in. Yeah, to have a clear delineation within the plan of actions to reasonable scientific certainty and actions of general benefit to the river. Yeah. So yeah, no, it's okay. So actions that reach the benchmark of reasonable scientific certainty, and actions that are for the general benefit of the river. Yeah.
So, do you want to just read that back? I mean, I'm coming.
For the executive to take up with the Cabinet Commission and Statutory Officer Group to basically come up with a clear differentiation.
In the plans.
Yeah, in the plans. Between the benchmark of scientific certainty and
between the actions required and
reasonable scientific
certainty and other actions that are of general benefit
to the river.
Yeah. Excellent. Well done. Thank you. Councillor Highfield.
Yeah, I don't think it will modify that, but I'd like to recommend that the actions to turn off the taps and the actions to recover the river from the historic situation be more clearly differentiated, and indeed to take it further, that sum of money that we think we've lost in GDP is not just a number that we didn't get. It represents considerable social losses, jobs, money, incomes. It will have an effect for decades to come on the area that's been affected. So what we should be doing is we're saying, right, if we can say that we're turning off the taps, then, and that the new development that we then permit will not make the situation worse, we can work on the recovery of the historic problems separately to that. We don't commit the damage that we're doing to people's lives based on something that they will not actually significantly affect. We need to separate the two very clearly, and then we can work on the river may still fail, the lug may still fail, but it will be because of the historic legacy thing that we are working on and trying to get rid of, which we've already heard is going to take decades probably to get ended, because it's such a long-lasting problem. So, because my concern for my constituents is that damage to their lives and their incomes and their job prospects, young people who are born in that area, because there is a much restricted development, and I'm very concerned about that, even though I care very much about the environment and the river as well.
Is that appropriate from a legal point of view, given the Dutch case? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, the problem is the lug is is failing, then we can't do anything that would add to that problem, and that's not our call. That's Natural England in response to the Dutch cases. So, it doesn't matter what the plan says. It's not going to make that difference.
What's the situation of the lug when it arrives in England? Because a lot of it is in Wales.
It was passing under the old targets, it's failing under the new targets.
So it arrives with us, failed.
Not on your targets, on NRW's targets.
Okay.
So we've got different targets on both sides of the border at the moment because NRW tightened their targets in order to generate a failure. The reasons are complicated, and I won't go into here, but I'll leave it at that.
But even if it's narrowly passing, there's a headroom question that we talked about. We don't have much headroom when it arrives with us,
No.
even if it's just about within target levels.
No, you don't have headroom.
Yeah.
The problem in Wales is, and we're getting this from data, is it's a different problem. It's not soluble reactive phosphate, it's total phosphorus. And so trying to make a target to fit a failing ecological status that's being driven by total phosphorus, which is manures and other things, you have to lower your soluble reactive phosphate target to a very low level in order to generate that failure. And that's basically the situation that NRW have found themselves in.
And if we have the sewage treatment for all the sewage, certainly the new stuff that's coming out in the lug catchment in our area, is that going to, even though it's a much lower level because it's been stripped, is it still going to be a trigger that will cause us to fail?
Yes, but there's a massive opportunity at the moment with the new Dŵr Cymru the new Dŵr Cymru investment plan, that they are required to have a minimum release from all their works of, I think it's 5 milligram per litre. That is at a point that you can't put the capital infrastructure onto those works because it's too expensive to get such a small little release in terms of the concrete build. And if you go down a integrated wetland route, you get a much higher degree of performance. So that is going to create a lot of headroom in the coming future because it's going to be beyond Dŵr Cymru's regulatory requirement. So this is something that the plan can drive at. If this is going to be a large opportunity for solving the problem.
Is there a recommendation that we can make about that?
I think separating the plan into those two forms, into those
We've
two
already
streams,
done that,
we'll do that. But this is exactly what, if you separate the plan, this is exactly the type of opportunity that the Nutrient Management Board can identify and make happen.
I want to bring Christine in shortly, but we are going to be looking at wetlands soon, Councillor Highfield, and I think if that is a way forward from what Simon has said, then is an issue around who is actually shouldering the burden for paying for those wetlands. And I think I want to explore that because there will be a recommendation, I think, coming out of that about why is it Herefordshire paying for the wetlands and not others as well. Christine, you wanted to come in?
Again, very short, but it hasn't been mentioned. Just to say that the basic problem is compliance with the habitats regulations, so that anything you do which has environmental impacts on an SAC has to make an appropriate assessment where you describe the impacts that you're going to have, and that according to reasonable scientific certainty, the impacts won't be negative. So whatever anybody recommends, in the end, it will be looking at how this sits with the habitats regulations, which of course we do need because we do want to protect our designated sites.
Thank you, Christine. Well, we've captured that other recommendation. I do want to have something around wetlands, Councillor Highfield. I think the two together might help in terms of what you're trying to achieve here.
Because we got to push on. It isn't just about the environment. We talked at the very beginning about a balance. So
economic development. I come on to a tricky question of value for money. I don't know whether we can answer this question. Has it proved value for money for the council to be involved with the NMB? I suppose if you said we wouldn't have got our core strategy agreed by the inspector, then we didn't really have a choice.
Yep, that's the basic condition.
So we were forced to, whether we liked it or not. I still would like at least.
Sorry, just to correct.
Yeah.
It was the solution. It was the solution that the council proposed after talking to the Environment Agency on what could get the core strategy through. So the creation of the board was a proposal of the council.
Okay, so it was a necessary condition. But going forward, I do want to have a recommendation, members, on VFM and the NMB, and that we should be now thinking what are our business priorities for the NMB and what KPIs do we want to have as a measure of that success. Because as all of you have said, things have changed. The problem has changed in a way because the measurement and the data has been collected has informed us much better about what the problem is. And I think going forward, we need to think as a council, what do we want out of the NMB now? Simon?
I think the key change is that a solution has emerged. Before there wasn't a solution, but the idea that we could get scientific certainty of offset with net gain for the river as well has created a new pathway and avenue for the board or a new pathway and avenue for the council to enable its core plan and to move forward.
Liz?
And it doesn't mean that that's the only solution. There are probably other solutions. The test is the scientific certainty, and I'm sure that there's going to be a solution if we do the right science on it from the reduction in the manures in the catchment. But at the moment, there's some unknowns in there. So, but the certainty envelope is going to be much higher. So if you're working on 95% certainty, you might only get 2% of the benefit, rather than when we're working on a wetland, we might be getting 80% of the benefit. But that 2% of the benefit, when you look at the total quantum of the manures that are being removed, actually might be more meaningful than the stuff we're doing with the wetlands. But that's something that needs to be worked through to make happen.
So I would suggest that if the proposal is to separate out the action plan between that's working towards river betterment and that's working towards certainty to provide growth, then you probably separate the KPIs out to reflect that. So the one might be demonstrating the trajectory towards compliance in terms of the river, and then the other might be in terms of more planning related, in terms of how much planning, how much development has been able to be progressed against the strategic mitigation.
So let me be clear here. Rather than having a generic objective on VFM and business priorities, you're happy that the recommendation we've got so far covers that to some extent in terms of what the council requires for an NMB, but we just need to make sure the KPIs reflect that. So we need more or less a parallel recommendation that talks about the KPIs rather than just the plans. So, Clark, well, if you go back to the original recommendation, I think we could just add in and the executive should set KPIs that measures that separation, the effectiveness of that separation. If you go back to it, we'll just stay with that for time being.
Do you want it read out? For the executive to take up with the Cabinet Commission and Statutory Officer Group the importance of drawing a clear differentiation between actions relating to the benchmarking of scientific certainty and actions that are of general benefit for the river.
And a full stop, and then the continuing the recommendation, the executive should set KPIs to reflect that and to ensure that that separation is delivered.
I would make that a separate recommendation.
Well, a separate recommendation, I don't mind. Okay. The executive should set KPIs that reflect or that underpin the measurement of the achievement of the previous recommendation, or how do you want to put it?
KPIs too.
Something else I'd like to add. Do you have a definition of what scientific certainty is, or reasonable scientific certainty? What is your definition that you're using here?
It's defined in the Habitats Directive as without Lancouis, sorry, Welsh accent, without Lancouis, so without reasonable uncertainty. So it's a reasonable certainty. We have defined that on a data analysis statistical test as 95% certainty.
And that will be certainty, reasonable certainty, that something is going to work.
Yes, both work and the performance of and how it performs as well.
So in other words, if you had something that was proposed that you weren't sure whether it would work or not, there's no certainty about it, but you are pretty certain it won't cause any harm, are you going to go with it?
No, you would have to. It comes down to statistics. So the example that I used was with wetlands. Say, for example, one particular wetland. There is an estimated reduction. The mean reduction will be about 300 kilos of phosphorus per year in this. But actually, because the data is noisy, it could be anything between 320 and 280. So within the 95% band. So you're able to trade effectively 280 rather than the 300. When you are looking at reduction in manures, there might be a reduction of 2,000 tonnes, but actually when you start to look at the certainty of it, you might only be able to trade 2 tonnes of that, but until you improve the data and the certainty on it. So, but it does mean that because the quantum is so large of the 2,000 tonnes of phosphorus within the manures, that actually even with very, very wide error bars, which is what you need to work on your error bars when you're dealing with your scientific certainty under the Habitats Directive. Even with those very wide error bars, you've still got a big chunk underneath. That is an exercise that needs to be done, and that's the point of certainty is we're using 95% statistical certainty of performance.
Okay, I understand that fully, but it means you remove the possibility of experimenting with projects that might or might not work. They sound like a good idea, but there's no evidence yet.
And this is exactly what we're doing with on-farm wetlands. So with on-farm wetlands, we don't know the loading coming in, we don't know the loading, but we know what the performance is. On those wetlands, you can deliver, monitor, and then trade, or you can predict with certainty. So if you build and monitor, then you have very high levels of certainty, if you understand. So you can do the novel stuff, you can't predict it until you've built and monitored.
So with the wetlands, for example, then we've gone through that process. So we've done the modelling, or the designers have done the modelling for us in terms of the phosphate reduction, and then we've had that independently verified, and then we have incorporated a buffer into the amount of phosphate reduction. So it shouldn't limit innovative practice, if you like. It's just making sure that you implement an appropriate buffer to protect against and to ensure that it meets that level of certainty for habitats regulations.
And as you monitor after construction, you might find it performs better, and then you've got an actual, and then you create more headroom.
And that's a good time to actually go on to wetlands and ask the pointed question: why was it necessary for us as a council to solely invest in wetlands, and why have we not had that investment shared amongst partners? Because the wetland outcome helps the Environment Agency in terms of nutrient recovery of the river as well, doesn't it?
But it is primarily to facilitate growth within the county, and therefore it's the priority of the council rather than Natural England, I would suggest.
I was talking about the Environment Agency as well.
And the Environment Agency.
Have we not asked them?
Rachel's dropped off the coy.
She has, unfortunately, yes.
It was. I look at it as an impact investment by the council. So it was getting the first one across the line. It was an impact investment. As I understand it, you're getting your money back in the sale of the housing credits, and then moving forward to build the next one, and I've got a rolling program. So it's an impact investment that you're getting the money back on.
But we're pretty short this year coming.
So
I'm just trying to find ways that we can actually ensure that more wetlands can be brought forward in the future.
Simon is right. It will repay over time, but obviously there's a potential issue over lag. With the sale of credits, and then wanting to roll out more wetlands and do more of it to mitigate for more housing. And we are in receipt of some funding to do that. So we'll be carrying on.
So you don't think in a recommendation asking the executive to ask the SOG to share the burden of investing in wetlands would be a good one?
I think the statutory officer group, unlikely, logically, that there could be an argument for Welsh Water to Cymru, because it can, in essence, they're working as tertiary treatment to their sewage treatment works. But eventually somebody had to take the risk, and somebody had to just get on and do it and make it happen, and the Heritage Council did. And in the wake of us sort of stepping up and doing that, we've now coming forward with a number of wetlands, I think, that they're proposing.
I think the point here is your impact investment has led to Dŵr Cymru taking so Dŵr Cymru are now taking the lead. Well, not the lead. They are now engaging with the process, and under the next AMP process, they've got a significant amount of money set aside to do this, to over-deliver, and then to create headroom with the over-delivery.
I hear what you all say, but I'm a politician and I'm looking to my residents, and the fact that their council tax money is being invested in wetlands, which is a good thing.
But it isn't. That's the point. It's not their council tax money. I mean, the initial funding, 2 million plus 1 million. The 2 million was from the New Homes bonus. So that's constrained what that can be spent on. It's not something that can just go into the general.
That could have gone on something else.
Taxi thing. Well, usually it has to be something to support the delivery of housing. So.
All right. Okay.
And then there was 1 million from the LEP, and then we've got 1.76 million coming from DLUC now, which and all of it, because we're selling the credits, will come back into the council.
So there's no mileage in our recommendation along those lines?
I think the value for money is very good, given that what we're doing is addressing the issues that Councillor Highfield raised in terms of losing skills, losing jobs, creating homes, affordable homes, all the rest of it. And the impact of the local economy of this moratorium, which is 200 million and more. Seeing local businesses having to operate outside of the county, good local companies having to work outside. It's a situation that we can't see extended any longer than is absolutely necessary, and the fastest and most efficient way of dealing with it was just to take it on and do it.
Well, I'll ask the question around a different way then, Councillor Swinglehurst. Would there be more wetlands coming on stream if others were sharing the burden?
We only need to offset the amount of phosphate that we need to offset. So there's a kind of for a start, you can't just kind of pop them down anywhere. They have to be operate as tertiary treatment to a rural sewage treatment work. So therefore, it requires that Welsh Water agree the site. We have to obtain the land. There's a lot. You can't just kind of go crazy. And also, we only need to offset so much. The stuff that's already held up, the stuff that is latent, and the applications that would come within the plan period, and that's then the totality. We're also looking at a really good initiative, which is to replace old septic tanks in schools with best available technology, and that has certainty. It's great for the school, it's great for us, and it also represents very good value for money, added into the phosphate reduction that we can see to scientific certainty to deliver housing. So I'm feeling reasonably confident that we've got this covered off, and the funding will work through over time.
So how many wetlands are there now in the pipeline, as it were?
3 at the moment,
3, plus the one that's operating.
including Luston.
Councillor Highfield, do you think that's a pretty good outcome in terms of answering your question that you posed previously?
I'm confident that we're on the right track. My only concern is how fast we're moving down the track. That's really the thing. We are now doing the right things in the right direction. Are we moving fast enough? Which is why I moaned about the EA giving us a 4-month delay over a promising project. So if everybody's on their game and is doing what they should be doing, then we're moving in the right direction, and I'd be happy with it. But I don't know whether Alyssa believes that is the case.
It cuts across all agencies as well, in that the determinant of when you can start trading, when you have certainty that the thing is going to be built, i.e. you have the funding in place and the planning permission and the consents, then you can start opening up then you can start trading and opening up the housing. So it's Environment Agency plus the council plus IDB, all the various consenting organisations.
So yeah, as far as I'm aware, the cabinet decision is in March. So it's to do the additional wetlands. Where I think we are being slightly held up is understanding what the AMP8 for Welsh Water is, in order that we could make plans around that. The details of AMP8, we haven't got that yet, have we?
No, so the Environment Agency have advised us that they're happy for the data to be released to the council, but we're just waiting for Welsh Water to provide us that information in order that we can do some feasibility assessment around the south of the county for wetlands in the south.
Having had that discussion, is there anything on your side in terms of wetlands that we could make as a recommendation as a committee that would help you in what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think a recommendation might be to contact Welsh Water to ask for that data to be shared with us, because there has been a delay on providing that.
Let's capture that for the clerk.
Cymru do have an issue that it's yet to be determined by Ofwat.
Okay, but they have advised that they have spoken with the Environment Agency and they're happy for that information to be shared with us. Yeah. So it is just a resource issue, and that's the reason that I've been given as to why it's delayed.
Yeah. Great.
Can we capture that recommendation for the clerk? So the recommendation is the executive should approach Welsh Water and ask for what data?
Can I send that through to you, the detail? Is that okay for me to do that?
Could you ping it on Teams now?
I just see if I can find that for you.
If you could work on that now, Liz, thankfully, because I'm coming on to the last stage of these questions, which is going to be around my favourite subject, which is the water protection zone, which I know, Councillor Swinglehurst, you've been a great supporter of, and it goes back to our motion in January 2022 when the council unanimously supported pushing for a water protection zone. I've got a few questions there, 14, 15 and 16. I'll just quickly go through them because I'm conscious of time. We do need to have an adjournment for everybody to have a toilet break and everything else, and we do need to then get the recommendations together and put it to the committee, and then we have to have my update. I'll just quickly go through that. Should there not be a review date or some glide path timetable by which we decide to focus on implementation of the WPZ, as with Pearl Harbour, and should that not really be owned by the NMB, Councillor Swinglehurst? I'm tempted to put a recommendation along those lines, to be honest.
Well, the Nutrient Management Board voted by majority in favour of a water protection zone in January 22. Yeah, because I mean, one of the prerequisites is that you have to feel that you've run out of road with the existing regulatory framework. So that went forward. Did you know the council likewise, and a letter went to the then Secretary of State, Rebecca Power. The decision to to go with the water protection zone has to be supported by the statutory officers, has to be supported by EA and NE, and agreed by the Secretary of State. The very clear steer from the Secretary of State was no. So you can either put more and more resources into trying to convert that into a yes, or you just have to accept that and get on with something else. And I think the feeling was that we didn't want to put more and more officer time and effort into pursuing something that was not within our gift. Having said that, we could continue to lobby and you know, make noise, which is what we do I think as an authority.
I was quite tempted because of this new SOG statutory officers group that's been formed, and that's meeting in private, of course, which I found quite surprising, given that we do try and be transparent when it comes to matters that affect our residents. I'm really still tempted to put them on the line with the WPZ as a committee. I mean, obviously it'd be up to the committee members as to whether they would want to support such a recommendation. I'll read the recommendation out because I think that's better rather than just discussing it. The executive should seek clarification from the SOG on what is its plans for a timetable of action on nutrient recovery towards a possible end result of introducing a WPZ, the so-called glide path. You happy with that? Committee members?
Yeah, I think that gives us a timetable within which, because I'm actually quite happy with the direction we're now moving. I said that just now, but the pace of change is the issue, and whether we can get things through the bureaucracy quickly enough. If we're on that glide path, if everything goes tickety-boo with the current thing, we can say, well, we don't need to bother with this. But if we launch ourselves on the glide path, then we're not losing ground on it either. So, yeah, I'd agree with that.
I think the other thing to remember is the water protection zone. It's not a you know, quick magic wand. It's long and involved and requires a lot of data and a lot of arguments, that, you know, big legal toing and fro. So it might be counterproductive in as much as it would suck a lot of resource out of what is currently going on. Having said that, there was, I think, what was it? Is it the fish legal case? Yeah. Where the Fish Legal Land Trust. Yeah. So Simon, you can fill in on that.
There's a case. Well, there's two cases going on at the moment. One case is that NRW haven't performed their function as a competent body in allowing for the development of the poultry industry in Wales. And the other one is that EA are not regulating in England, which is the one that's being held in Cardiff on the 8th of February. Not delivering their regulatory function properly. The other bit of noise here is the diffuse water protection plan, which is long awaited and is coming allegedly from DEFRA, which could easily include the solutions to both of those, to both the EA regulating and or a WPZ being put in place. So, as I said, it's difficult at the moment because we're slightly in wait and see. We want to see what the result of this court case on the 8th of February is.
But the recommendation reflects the fact that the NMB did at one point support implementation of water protection zone. So at least it reflects back on them that decision, and at least ask the question, which I think is useful. Okay.
I think the NMP still does. NMP still does support the implementation.
So, okay. Well, that comes to the end of the 16 questions. So I think what we will now have to do now is we will have an adjournment, and I'll ask for the live stream to be switched off, Joelle, for 15 minutes. If those that have been attending do wish to go, then I'm happy for them to do so, because we'll be looking at our recommendations. I would just like to thank Councillor Swinghurst, Liz Derberley, Simon Evans, Mark Averill, Christine from the campaign for the protection of rural Wales, and also Rachel, who has dropped off for attending. If you want to go now, you can, because what the committee will do at the end of the 15-minute period will be to look at our recommendations and then decide to vote on them. And then the last item is just my update for the committee. But you're welcome to stay if you want to find out what we actually agree in the end after this long discussion. But thank you very much for a very interesting and eye-opening discussion. I mean, I've learnt a lot from this today, and I think I've learnt a lot more in a shorter period of time than I've done as 5 years as a councillor on this matter. Thank you. So back at 12:30. Right, welcome back to the ESCC meeting. We are now going to look at our recommendations, and first of all, we have to decide whether we're going to vote for them en bloc. Are committee members happy to vote for them en bloc before we look at them? Can we have a vote, please? Yeah, that's unanimous. Clark, that we'll look at them en bloc. Do you want to have a few minutes just to read them, just to make sure that you're happy with them? You're happy with that?
That's not very good grammar. Seriously consider maybe, or just drop the seriously.
No, it is. Drop this seriously. Yeah. I would agree. That's chair. It needs to go up a bit, Joel. Yeah.
Is there a 9?
No, it's just 8, just 8.
Okay, I didn't see the last line wasn't the...
The SOGs, the statutory officers group.
Yeah. One more.
No, no, we're going to spell them out. We will spell them out. We're not going to leave them as acronyms. We'll spell them out in the recommendations. Clark will be spelling them out, won't we?
Well,
The
I think
acronyms.
SOG
Yes.
is exactly a very good acronym. Really.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what they're using.
Jonathan made a promise about that in the council, and Roger did.
So, committee members, are we happy to vote for them? All those in favour? That's agreed. Thank you very much.
Oh, no, go in.
No, we've got item 8. Item 8 is the chairman's update. I'm going to be updating you on two things. First of all, and this is very important, since this committee's inception, we've only had a response from the executive on one set of recommendations. One set. That's the flood risk management action plan recommendations. As for the local plan report that we wrote and that went to Cabinet in January 2022, I have put them back to planners personally myself. So that report is now with planners, Clark, and we can register that. We have still got outstanding responses from the executive on waste and recycling, river pollution, the Environment Act, and we still haven't had anything back from them on that. What I would like your agreement to, committee members, is this committee writes to John Coleman, Head of Democratic Services, to express our concerns that we are, as a committee, fully committed to making recommendations, but what is the point if we never get an executive response on them? Who would actually do that letter to John Coleman? Would that be from the clerk?
It would be from you, Chair.
So it needs to be drafted then. Yeah. So if someone can provide me with a draft, because I do think it's unfair that we've got this set of recommendations stretching right back to 2022, and we're not getting any response from the executive on it. So that letter I'll write to John Coleman. And I do think we should actually be asking for the 2-month deadline for responses to be adhered to, because we're given these recommendations and we're not hearing anything back from them. So that's my first point to make in this update. The second point is we have to construct a work programme for 24-25. We have a number of possible items on the table. We have public rights of way from Councillor Highfield, and on that one I would include greenways and the greenway policy because that's linked with it as well. The committee has expressed a desire to look at 20-mile-per-hour speed limit zones, and I think that is another candidate. We have a number of candidates from our reserve list that I'll run through as well. We have farming, which I think is too generic. I mean, we need to think about that. But that's one that came from the late Councillor Ginman. He was very anxious that we looked at farming. I think what we're looking at there is really two areas. One is intensive livestock rearing, and the other one is land management practice, but that's another particular item. There's also an area around energy efficiency and sufficiency. Our remit does include that, and around energy efficiency we're talking about not just retrofitting, but insulation, and also, of course, renewable energy. Now, these are all possible candidates in themselves or as a combined list in terms of a work programme item. And we also have the very thorny problem of how many resources does this council have that is actually geared towards net zero and the environmental priorities that we have. Members will recall, I think it was those that were on the Scrutiny Management Board will recall that Councillor Swingle has said to me when I asked that very question that a lot of these resources are invisible because they're not necessarily directed towards net zero initiatives or environmental issues, but what they are doing within the council offices might actually benefit that. But I still think we should probe away and find out exactly what's going on there. Because what's the point of the council having an emergency declaration on climate and ecological change if we don't even have any idea what sort of resource we are putting on that to achieve it? And we all know my concerns about the fact that environment and economy as a directorate on the revenue side has suffered over the years because of the increase in imbalance between the resources allocated to that and resources allocated to children's services and to adults. Are there any other items that committee members want to
I think that's excellent, but I think we need to expand on the wording of what we're actually going to target, but that there's a lot of things we should be looking at, and I'd heartily agree with that.
Okay. We'll capture that in the minutes, won't we, Clark? What we plan next to do is, I think, will be for me and you, Scrutiny Officer, to get together to try and put a work programme together.
I think that's what we agreed, Chair.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, one thing that came to the news recently was the poor performance of Herefordshire with electrical vehicle charging points. I was wondering if that's something we could look at as well, EV?
Yeah, that's within our remit. Yeah, we'll note that down as well. We obviously have to prioritise it and decide exactly when's the right time to look at these. The only other point I want to raise, and this is one for you, Scrutiny Officer, do we need to have a meeting in May? We don't traditionally have a meeting in May of scrutiny committees.
We don't have. Hold on. You don't have to have a meeting if you don't want one.
What would be your advice? Because obviously, we have to think about resource and implications for everyone.
My advice would be to have a meeting if you need one, and if you don't.
So to put one in the timetable.
That's common sense.
So, at the risk of sort of stating the obvious, I mean, I think that's my, don't have a meeting just for the sake of having a meeting. If you can't, don't book a meeting in May and then scratch your heads wondering what the hell to do with the meeting. If you don't need it, don't book it.
Well, just given that there's so many things going on, maybe we should put a date in, but the chairman can talk around and say, well, we'll cancel that because we actually haven't got anything enough to talk about and we can skip it. But if we don't put a date in, there's all sorts of clashes that occur if you don't get it in advance.
My thinking was around an informal, not a public meeting, to agree the work programme.
I thought we were agreeing the work programme now. One thing I would suggest, if we're going to deal with agriculture, let's do it in May, because that is always the best months. Yeah. That's good. And if you, I'm perfectly happy to sort of, lead on that, but I'm perfectly happy to get something organised because I know the characters who we need to talk to.
So the view of the committee is that we do pencil in a date for May as well, with a possible formal meeting on agriculture. Although we will have to draw out exactly what aspects of agriculture we want to discuss, land management practices and what else.
Yeah, if I might, Chair, I think if I would spend a bit of time thinking about how you might go about that first. By all means, put a date in the diary, but if it's a topic that you think you're going to be spending a lot of time essentially fact-finding, educating yourself, finding out more information about this, committee meeting might not be the best forum to do that. It might be a visit, it might be a task and finish group meeting, it might be an informal meeting. So I was saying, it's just perhaps spend a little bit of time having a think about how to go about that before agreeing that you'll do it in May in a meeting.
Okay. Councillor Highfield?
Yeah, a very important aspect of scrutinising all of these areas that you've mentioned is that we really need to know, as close as is possible, what is best practice in that field. Because obviously our overall aim is to ensure that the county as a whole is following best practice for the sake of the environment in every area that we have any influence over whatsoever. And we are quite ignorant in some areas about what is best practice. And I was, let's have a tiny nag at the council. I asked some time ago and was promised expert advice on the ecology of how you manage hedges, okay? And I didn't get anything until eventually I was told, well, DEFRA are doing a survey and they're asking for a, well, I don't like the way DEFRA's doing it. They're asking opinions from the general public. That's no way to make a scientific suggestion. Fortunately, I've made contact with the world's expert on hedges, and I hope to be able to give the council some advice from a true expert on what we should be doing about hedges. But that's just one small example. If we know what is the best way to deal with hedges, the very best recommended way, not everybody can do that. Farmers have got limitations, but at least we can try to meet best practice. And if when we're doing this, the scrutinising of all these different areas that you've mentioned, Chairman, we really need to be in a position to either at the time know what is best practice, and then we can suggest how it might be coming close to implemented, or at least we can target finding out. We can make a suggestion that somebody find out what is best practice, because that must be the overall objective. If we're to meet net zero and all the other things, clean up the rivers and all the other things, we need to know what is the best practice that can be followed reasonably within the county, and we need to be able to advise that, and the council should be in a position to lead on advising that.
Yes, Liz, since you're here.
So we are just developing a draft version of the tree and hedgerow policy for the council's own tree stock. Happy to, once we've progressed that, to share that with you. I can also provide you some information on hedgerow management as well, if that's helpful. Happy to do that.
It's always helpful. The person I'm contacting is Professor Dover, who's the Professor of Ecology at Stafford University,
okay,
and is the author of numerous published works on hedgerow management, both from the farmer's point of view, from a wildlife point of view, and so on. And he appears to be, and I can't find anybody in the world who appears to know more about hedges than he does. So let's compare what you've got with what he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely. The other suggestion I was going to make was that the Minerals and Waste Local Plan looks like it's going to full council for adoption in March, and it will have an element on agricultural waste management, including the livestock units, and that will require nutrient neutrality. So I don't know if that would be a focus for one of your sessions, perhaps.
I did look at that. We in the General Scrutiny Committee had looked at an earlier draft of that, and we came up with recommendations. Everybody was happy with that. I looked again at what the inspectors had actually added to the plan, and it was very nuanced. It wasn't really anything that was significant. And I took the decision that wouldn't be one of our priorities, because we have so much else that we need to look at, Liz. That's the thing. So I agree with you. The waste side of that is in there, but we'd already scrutinised that in September 2020, and it's only just now come to a point where the inspectors have added their bit. So when I looked at that, I thought there wasn't enough in that to trigger the committee having to look at it again. If we hadn't done it before, then I would have taken up your recommendation. So can we stay with that tree and hedgerow policy? Is that another item we want to include in our work programme then?
Yeah, it's part of the sort of things that you've mentioned. But yeah, absolutely, it's very important because hedgerow policy is something that affects almost everybody in the county.
Okay.
And on top of which, if we're talking about wildlife corridors, that will be made along hedges. I mean, that is something that's coming through and it needs finessing. But there are a lot of opportunities with that. And it's still all about hedges. And we've got a nature recovery plan, which will depend on hedges. And we're also going to talk about public rights of way. Green lanes and those sort of places are also a very important wildlife recovery issue. And they're being abused at the moment or not being managed properly. So these all come in, they're all integrated, these problems. But my key point is let's make sure that whatever we scrutinise, we are trying to identify or encourage the authorities to identify the best practice that can be followed.
Unless, of course, Herefordshire is the best practice, as it is with wetlands, as far as I'm aware. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, I think hedgerows and trees and prow, that is one on its own. And I think we should be very careful because hedges are a very emotive thing to farmers. There was a recommendation came out from RSPB about growing hedges taller, better for birds. It's not. If you have a taller hedgerow, it benefits two, one of which is a magpie. The biggest killer of all small birds, thrushes, blackbirds, that type of thing, is the magpie. And so you want to decrease the height of a hedge, not increase it, because thick hedges mean small birds can survive. And that's just as typical of what some of the recommendations are coming out of people that don't know anything about hedges.
Yeah, so let's get
them. Yeah, and that's why I'm delighted, Councillor Thomas, you're on my committee. Because you can always bring a more balanced view to these environmental debates. But remember, we are environmental and sustainability. So we do have a much wider remit than environmental matters. But Liz, if you're willing to share that policy with us, then that would be very good when it's available.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's in relation to the council's own tree and hedgerow stock. But we are hoping to progress a county-wide tree strategy that would need to be aligned with national guidance as well. So I think it would be timely, perhaps, to do a session on that.
So I'm coming to the conclusion that the May meeting probably should be an informal one rather than the public eye, where we can thrash out over 3 hours the sorts of discussions we're having today, because it's been quite a short discussion, and it's the first time we've actually started looking at 24-25 as a committee. So I think if we go for a May meeting date, I think we'll go for an informal one where we've got time ourselves to just sit down as a committee and discuss what we want to do.
Can I suggest we do that over lunch somewhere? I can book somewhere where we can all sit round a table, have something to eat and thrash it out. How about that? Do you like that idea?
Well, we'll bear that in mind, and it's very kind of you to offer to buy us lunch, because
obviously as officers we'll sign the appropriate forms, so you can. We wouldn't want you to be out of pocket inappropriately.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. I mean, I'm not saying, but we need to be in a forum where we can discuss and not be distracted. That's the only thing. Well, we'll consider, but it'll be an informal meeting in May, and then July we'll start the actual formality of, and we need to decide what we want to start with in July, and then September and so on. But I think we've got a very good list there, Scrutiny Officer, from which we can draw enough from it for next year's programme. Yes. Fine, is that the end of that item? Then we move on to item 9. I just have to remind the committee that the date of the next meeting is 25th of March, and we will be looking at net zero, which is a very interesting topic in itself. And in particular, we'll be looking at two aspects of net zero. One is how the council is doing with its own infrastructure and its own actions, and also how the council is doing in terms of encouraging the wider county to achieve net zero. So that's on the 25th of March. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, we finished, that's the last one. I just want to go back to something that you said, which I agree with you, about Cabinet. Are Cabinet actually discussing our recommendations and then ignoring them, or are they not even discussing them?
Each set of recommendations has gone before Cabinet to note, and I attend Cabinet to actually present them, not in detail, but just simply to give a rounded sort of version of them. They then have 2 months to respond to that. That is in the Constitution, but that is simply not happening. And that's a problem we've got as a committee. If we are willing to sit down and spend 3 hours of our time, plus all the reading beforehand and the research beforehand, to come up with what we think are sensible recommendations that can help the Cabinet to take policy forward, to take delivery of services forward, then I think they should have the decency to actually come back to us and tell us what they think of our recommendations.
I say that because we, as our Conservative group, got a meeting here on Wednesday evening, and that's something that we could actually bring forward.
We are still live, but I'd be grateful if you could do it. We are still live though, but I'd be grateful if you could do that. That'd be very kind, Councillor Thomas. I declare this meeting closed, and can we switch off the live stream, and can I thank you for your forbearance over the last 3 hours.